And we're looking at the teachings of the Buddha that, maybe need a little bit of a translation for modern life. They need a little bit of bringing it into the context so that we know how they're helpful to us 2,500 years after the Buddha taught in a very different society that we live in now. Last week, Vidanya talked about the teaching what we call conditioned co-production. So that's a translation of what we call Pratityasamutpada. And this is a core teaching of Buddhism, and actually it's a very wonderful and liberating teaching because of what flows from it. So it's a very human impulse to try and understand why things happen the way they do. And humans have come up with loads of theories to explain why stuff happens, which is the name of this talk, Why Stuff Happens. So there's lots of theories around. One is that it's God. Things happen because of God. It's God's will that the world is how it is. In fact, individually, what happens to us is God's will. Another theory might be fate, some kind of idea that we're fated for certain things to happen to us in our lives. Or we might have a different theory, which is actually it's all completely random. It's just by chance. It's like the world is a bit of an empty machine that just somehow runs along a few laws, but it's kind of empty in some way. But the Buddha taught a middle way between these ways of seeing the world. According to the Buddha's teaching, the things that we experience in the world, the phenomena we experience, the things that happen, they're processes. They come into being because of certain conditions, and when those experiences, those things will pass away when those conditions stop being active, when they themselves change. So what conditioned co-production means is that we're in a process, we're in a flow. Certain conditions come together, something arises out of that, the conditions change, that will then disappear, and it will carry on going on like that. And that the conditions are very interconnected. There are many millions and billions of conditions that make any one thing happen, but they're not coincidental. If certain conditions happen, certain things will follow from that. There's a connection between one event and what follows from it. So from one set of events, just this other set of events will emerge. And what's fantastic about that, why it's marvellous, is because it allows us to understand what conditions contribute to certain things happening. And so we can step in and influence, we can intervene, and we can change, to some extent, we can influence how we see the world, the experiences we have, how we experience the world. So last week, Vidanya talked about how we can learn to be in the gap, and that's being in the gap, which you'll all know, I hope, from the newcomers course. Being in the gap is that place where we can make a change. So the gap is something happens, there's a trigger, a stimulus, and we normally respond a certain way, but we're able to stay in a bit of a gap, often very uncomfortable, and we can make a decision. We can respond creatively. So instead of reacting, we can have a creative response to something that's pushed our buttons, that's triggered us. We can learn to do that. And he talked, as I said, about how it often isn't easy or comfortable to be able to do that. Oh, I've got a little fly. So this week I'm going to look in more detail at how conditioned co-production operates. And in particular, I'm going to look at karma. So karma, a very misunderstood concept. So within Pratityasamutpada, within conditioned co-production, there are regularities or laws that within the overall pattern. So there are regularities in reality. And when we've understood what these regularities are, the ones that lead us to liberation, we can align ourselves with them. And our liberation will arise on dependence on conditions. So there are regularities that determine spiritual growth and fulfillment. And when we know what those are, we can put ourselves in alignment with those. Because enlightenment is natural. It's not like a magic trick or some kind of intellectual theory or some kind of flight of fancy or just something that happens randomly to a few people somewhere. It's actually part of the natural world. So just like leaves come into bud, or the tides follow the stages of the moon, or swallows migrate to Africa and back every year, Buddhas appear in the world according to the same natural processes. So it's not that there's any supernatural agency or divine intervention, it's a natural process. That's what this talk is about, and how we can align ourselves with that natural process. So what we're going to be exploring is the 5 Neamas, which are levels of conditionality within conditioned co-production. And the founder of this Buddhist movement, Sangharakshita, has kind of found a teaching that had got a little bit lost, perhaps. It's a teaching from the Buddha's time and from after him. It's there in the Pali Canon and afterwards, but it's one that not many people had picked up, which is looking at different levels of conditionality, these 5 Neamas. And I think it's a really useful way of understanding the world. So Niyama actually means, literally, restraint or limitation or necessity. But I'm going to translate it as law. And it's not the kind of law that somebody thinks up in government or that any divine being has kind of ordered there to be a law. It's the kind of law in the way we talk about a law of nature. So we might, a law that describes the way that things are. So as I've been saying, life as we experience it is governed by certain natural regularities and laws, and they can be put into these 5 different ways of way which things arise independent on conditions, the niyamas. So they are, first of all, we have inorganic laws. I'm going to go through them again. Then we have organic laws. Then we have what I'm calling instinct and perception. Then we have the Karma Mirman, and then we have the Dharma Niyama. So I'm going to talk mostly about the Karma Niyama, but let's just run through what the other 3 are. I think an important thing actually already to spot is that karma is only one level of conditionality. There are 4 other levels as well. These first 3 levels, inorganic, organic, and instinct perception, they are studied by science. They're the kind of the realm of science. So the Niyama, or the inorganic laws, that's all the ways in which physical, organic matter, stuff, things, are conditioned. So this is the level of inorganic stuff. So we live in a world in which apples always fall down from trees. Okay? They don't just occasionally float off into space, or they don't just hang about halfway between the tree and the ground. Because of the law of gravity, they always hit the ground. In fact, if you sit under a tree for long enough with apples in it, one might hit you on the head and you might discover the law of gravity. And this law also governs things like thermodynamics, the structure of atoms, electricity, all those kind of inorganic things that are going on. The next one, which is the Bija Niyama, or the organic laws. So this is the realm of botany, biology, physiology. This is the ways in which living organisms interrelate in the plant and animal kingdoms. So things like photosynthesis, the way the heart works, the circulation of the blood, and most of these behave in ways that we can largely predict. So that's that area that that's looking at. The third one, which is called here the laws of instinct and perception, the Mano Niyama, this is in the animal kingdom. Things like flight or fight or freeze, that kind of that thing we have in us to, and naturally, if we're threatened by something, perception, those when the swifts that come to Walkley all migrate back home again. Some of our psychological processes as well, perhaps things to do with parenting, attachment as a child, all those kind of things are covered in this area. So those are 3 laws. These are 3 laws which are about how things happen. They're how things happen. Some of them happen on an inorganic level, some happen on an organic level, and some happen in this kind of area of instinct and perception. So let's look a little bit at the Karma Niyama, so this 4th area. So karma literally means action. It might mean action of our body, so something we do. It might mean action of speech, something we say. Or it might be action of mind, something that we think or that we feel emotionally. So karma is not reward and punishment. When people say instant karma, That's a misuse of the word karma, actually. So the Buddha is not out there, nor is anybody else out there judging us and punishing us if we've been really good. No, the other way around. Rewarding us if we've been really, really good, and punishing us if we've been really bad. It's not like, the Buddha's sitting up there or even here or anywhere doing that. It's absolutely not based on any kind of external figure judging, punishing, rewarding. And it's not that if I step on someone's toe, sooner or later someone will step on mine. Okay? It's not like the kind of universe is working it all out so that I get what I do. Do you see what I mean? It's about my state of mind. So my state of mind will have an effect for myself and for other people. So the intention of the stepping on somebody else's toe is the important thing. So if I step on your toe because I want you to get out of the way, because I'm in a rush to get on the bus or get on the train or something like that, well, that's a state of mind in which my comfort is more important to me than your comfort. And in that state of mind, I'm setting up habits. So in the future, I'm more likely to step on somebody's toe as I try to get on the bus. It's like I'm setting up this habit for the future. Another thing I might be doing is I might be stepping on your toe because I actively dislike you and want to cause you pain. If that's the way I respond to actively disliking a person, Shopperson is looking a bit worried. If that's the way that I respond to actively disliking someone is by wanting to step on their toe and cause them pain, well, that's really going to lead me into some dark places, isn't it? Because that's an idea that I will feel happy from somebody else's pain. So it's like I'm setting up a future for myself. Every time I do something, I'm more likely to do it in the future. So it's a bit like I'm setting up this habit for myself every time I do something. So that's what karma means. It means that how we act is setting up our future. We'll explore that a little bit more. So we can only have karma in this sense when we have what's called reflexive self-consciousness. So reflexive self-consciousness. That means that we're able to look at ourselves from within our own minds, and that we have a sense of ourself, of being at the centre of things. So as far as we know, this level of conditionality is very much a human thing. I don't think that animals can do this, because they don't think of themselves in the same way. They don't have this self-reflexive consciousness. So what the Karma Mirman does, it describes the relationship between a self-conscious subject, so that's our experience of ourselves, and its experience. So it's the law that governs the relationship between our actions and the effects of those actions. So like I was saying, my actions will always have an effect. So if I were to start shouting and swearing at one of you now, pick on one of you at random, it would have a really strong effect on you, obviously. It would make you quite upset, I imagine. You'd feel tense, you might want to retaliate, you might want to avoid me. And it would have an effect on me internally as well. I'd have really unpleasant emotions and painful thoughts. But if I was to choose at random one of you and rejoice in you and the wonderful things that you do, well, we'll give you a present maybe. You'd probably feel the opposite. You'd feel really pleased. You might want to talk to me after the talk. We'd have a very different relationship, and I'd feel different as well. I'd feel open. So we live in a world where every action has consequences that shape our minds. So if I act unselfishly, if I'm able to act unselfishly, go beyond my own desires in the moment, my consciousness will be modified. My future will be changed. I'll become a larger and more fulfilled person who's able to contribute to my life and those of around me. But if I do the opposite, if I act selfishly, I'll become an isolated, unhappy person who takes away from the lives of others. So if we act from negativity, from emotions like hatred, jealousy, resentment, it's like we contract inside. I can often feel that, actually. I can often feel in that kind of moment of selfishness or a difficulty, it's like I'm much smaller inside. But if we can act from generosity, from kindness, we expand and we connect with others. So our actions of body, speech and mind affect us and they affect other people. So it's a natural, this is a natural process, just like the first three niyamas. So we might think that actually certain things we do, we don't need to worry about, because it's really justified to hate that particular person because they are really bad. Okay? So feeling that hatred towards them is justified. Or actually, it's really fine to take something, I don't know what it would be, somebody's left something, somebody think, oh, I'll just have a bit of that chocolate, won't matter to them at all. But all those things will affect us. It's a law, whether we think it's bad or not. The world we experience, as I said, is to a very great sense, a mirror of the mind we inhabit. Hopefully you're remembering all this from the Newcomers course, where we talk about how we create the way that we behave, will create a personality, and that will create the world that we live in. So, for instance, a good story to describe this is there's a story of a gatekeeper at the doors of a city. And some people come up to the city to him and they say, so what kind of, we're moving to this city, we've got all our things with us, and we just wondered, what kind of a city is this? And the gatekeeper says, well, what were the people like in the city you just came from? And the people moving say, well, they were a bit mean and unfriendly, they were always grumbling, didn't really get on with them very well. And the gatekeeper says, well, I think you'll find the people in this city are just like that as well. Then somebody else comes along. The gatekeeper asks them what kind of people were there in your city that you came from. And they said, oh, they were really lovely, really friendly, really generous, delightful people. And the gatekeeper says, well, I think you'll find those kind of people in the city that you're moving to. So there's something about we bring with us these ways of being in the world, and they create the world that we live in. I remember I worked briefly one Christmas in a shop. The Buddhist centre used to be connected with a shop called the Evolution Shop, which you might know. And I worked in the shop at Christmas on the till. And sometimes it would be really busy. It was Christmas time and people were buying gifts. It was a gift shop. And there were queues just stretching way back. And people were doing their Christmas shopping, so it's completely understandable that they were feeling really grumpy. And they had to queue for ages, and it was a bit, it was like a really difficult day for them. So I really understood why they were grumpy. But it was interesting because some people were quite relaxed. They'd come up and they'd chat to me as the, just the person on the till. And I'd be quite nice back to them just naturally. Other people who were grumpy would come up, be really grumpy, ignore me, and I just wouldn't have a chat with them. I'd just kind of, serve them, and that would be it. And I thought it's really interesting because some people are living in a world where the shopkeepers are really lovely, and some people are living in a world where shopkeepers are a bit grumpy and short. And actually, I wasn't, I was the same person, but it was just how I responded to the people that I met. Okay, so I want to look at now something which is the difference between karma, which is the actions we do, and karma vipaka, which is the fruit of those actions. So karma vipaka is the fruits of a previous action. So all the time we're experiencing karma vipaka, your mental state right now is the fruit of your previous actions. And you've got no control over that at all. Okay? So what's happened to you in the past will be creating your mental state now, and you can't control that. But what you can do, what you can influence consciously, is how you respond to that state of mind. And that in turn will create your future internal and external experience. So an example is, so I think I hear someone say to me, Satyajyoti, you're not working hard enough. Okay, I think that's what they're saying. And I'm going to feel really defensive in response to that. That is my natural response, very defensive. A bit like I don't like that person actually very much. I want to avoid them. That's coming from my previous karma vipaka. I can't do anything about that response. So my first response when I think I hear someone say that will be this defensiveness, this closed off, this perhaps even anger. And there's no point berating myself or sort of actively trying to change that. All I can do is put myself in the gap and respond to the way that I'm feeling my karma vipaka in a different way. So for instance, I could not tell myself off for feeling that way. I feel that way because I've done it, 1,000 times before. I could maybe just stay calm, stay in the gap, and ask the person what they mean, because they might not even have meant that, My karma vipaka is such that I might hear people say that even if they don't mean it, So it's a bit like I need to check it out with them. And if I can do that, if I can stay calm, and I can think, and I think it might be true, maybe I'm not working hard enough, maybe they've got a point, there might be something about being open to that. And all that will set up something for the next time that somebody says to me, Satyajyoti, you're not working hard enough. It will set up, a lot of people don't ever say it to me, actually. But it's like, it will mean that next time I'm less likely to have that karma vipaka of feeling so defensive. Do you see what I mean? I've kind of broken that pattern. So karma vipaka is what happens from all the times we've responded in a certain way in the past. Get ourselves in the gap, respond differently, and we can create a new karma vipaka the next time, which hopefully will be a lot more pleasant, actually. Another example I thought would be like a lack of generosity. So somebody says to me, there's this great thing, it's really good, would you like to give money? And my first reaction is always no. Inside I just think, no, I would not like to give any money. And I feel really contracted and really tight and really mean. And I suppose I feel like that is because that's my karma vipaka of all the times in the past where I've gone, no, I'm not going to give to anything. But interesting, like if I think about it, I might think, well, actually, what do I spend my money on? At the moment, it seems to be a lot of iced coffees. Perhaps I'd quite like to give that money to something more worthwhile. That would be more, I might want to do that. So I can kind of like have the karma vipaka of the last time, but use my consciousness, my ability to think, to override it and to set up something new for the next time. And then hopefully next time someone asks me for some money, my response might be, well, I'll be open and see what, think about it. It won't be just that kind of clear no within me. Okay, so when we're working in this realm, with this realm of karma, there are quite a few mistakes we can make. And two of those are blaming ourselves, and the other is blaming others for our reactions. So blaming ourselves for the pain we experience now. So this is just linked to what I've just said, that we have this, we have karma vipaka, which is the result of past actions. And wherever we're feeling angry, resentful, jealous, whatever we don't like, full of despair, full of self-hatred, it's the consequence of our own past actions, and there's no reason to blame ourselves for it. What we need to do is respond well. In fact, it's going to be counterproductive if you spend a load of time blaming yourself for it. What we need to do is respond well so we don't add to it, and maybe we reflect on how we could behave now so that our future states of mind might be more enjoyable. The second mistake we make is that we blame others for our reactions, our suffering. So that kind of phrase like, he made me feel like that, she made me feel that. So no one can ever make us feel anything. Our responses come from our own history. So some people will behave in a certain way and I'm like, I can't believe that person's doing that. And then someone else will go, well, it seems fine to me. That response of I can't believe that or I'm angry with them, that's coming from my own past actions, behaviour. It's my karma vipaka. And I need to take responsibility for that, whatever it is. It's me that's triggered, whatever's happened. I need to take responsibility for my own response. So if I blame someone else for my reaction, I'm not taking that responsibility. And actually, I'm just going to carry on going round that cycle because I'm not looking for a way out of it. Okay, so that's a bit about the Karma Mirman. So clearly the Karma Mirman is about us being aware of what's going on for us and making a choice to respond in a different way. And by doing that, we create new habits that mean that in the future, we'll be a person who can be more like we'd like to be in that situation. It's a way that we can have some influence over our future experience. So down at the bottom, the fifth of these niyamas, is what's called the Dharma Neama. This is really hard to talk about, okay? So Dharma Neama processes are, they govern the arising of a Buddha. The Dharma Neama processes are where Buddhas arise. Dharma is a very rich word in Buddhism. You might have heard it used to talk about the teachings of the Buddha, but it also means the nature of reality, how things are, the teachings which lead to Buddhahood. And Dharma Neama processes usually come into play when we begin to leave our attachment to ourselves behind. There's a little bit from Maitreya Bandha here, which I really like. Usually we're locked into the drama of being me. And he says it might be a romantic comedy, It might be a revenge tragedy. It might be a soap opera. You can ask yourself, what is your drama that you're locked into? So we're locked into that. We're so locked into it, we don't notice the pull of something beyond us. Or you could call it the pull of something beyond us, the Karma Mirman, or you could call it a deeper current that runs throughout reality, a current that running through me, through all of us, that leads beyond me. It's a sense of something bigger than me, something that could come through me if only I got out of the way. We might have experienced a sense of it in meditation, or maybe in nature, or if we've been studying the Dharma, sometimes in ritual. Sometimes when we're working together, something magical can arise. Sometimes quite unexpected. I remember years ago, when I just started to meditate, I went on a really crowded train to Doncaster, and for some reason, halfway on the journey, I looked around and I just thought, these people are all so beautiful, I love them. It was just like something had come into me completely unexpectedly. I just hadn't set out to have that experience. So things like that can happen to us. Processes can happen. The process is always there if we can get ourselves out of the way. The trouble is, of course, that we've got the other forces pulling on us. There's those deep habits of greed, anger, ignorance. And what we need to do is create a much more pliable, more cultivated mind so that we can be open to the Karma Mirman. Yeah, when we've done that, we do that work in the Karma Mirman. So in the Karma Mirman, where we're working with our responses, we're staying in the gap, we're trying to be creative, that's where we can start to create a clearer, purer mind that allows us to be more receptive to the Dharma realm. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we might work. The word work or play, how we might play in these 5 levels of conditionality. Because what we can do is we can work with these levels intelligently so that we can grow, so that we can choose what kind of people we'd like to be. We'd like to become more aware, kinder, we'd like to suffer less, we'd like to be more used to others, we'd like to be more creative. We can choose to cooperate with the way things are, the reality that these 5 levels, these 5 niyamas are describing. So just like an intelligent person wouldn't put their fingers in an electric socket, because you'll get a shock, so a genuinely intelligent person would work in line with these niyamas. For instance, knowing that hatred only begets hatred. So why would you respond to someone else's hatred with hatred? So how might we do that? Well, first of all, I thought we might we need to understand that conditionality is very complex. So something that happens to us might happen because of all 5 levels of conditionality, or it might just happen with a few of them. So maybe somebody's got a fever. There might be inorganic things going on there, which I'm not sure what they are, but to do with different molecules kind of connecting with each other. So that'd be one. There might be the organic law, so that might be the fact that they've got a bacterial infection. So there's like bacteria in their body and all the processes that are going on there. Something to do with this instinct and perception thing. Well, they might have some kind of psychological issue that's just kind of burning them up or something like that. They might have a fever because of that. The Karma Mirman, well, they might have set up the conditions so that they respond to things by having a fever. That's an interesting idea, isn't it? Something to discuss. How could you? And I don't know. I mean, the Dharma Mirman, I think, somebody might be having such a strong kind of spiritual experience that they find that they have a temperature. So maybe you could just explore things that have happened and why in the groups and which niyama they might operate on. The second thing is, of course, that conditionality is very complex, as I said. Part of that is that we need to be really clear what role karma might have in something happening. So, for instance, some people would say, some schools of Buddhism or some Hindu schools would say that if a person is born very disabled, it might be because of what's happened to them in a previous life. Or it is because of what's happened to them in a previous life. That's really not how I understand levels of conditionality at all. If somebody's child is born disabled, I think the most likely reason is one of those, it's an inorganic law or an organic law has happened. Something has happened to do with in their development. It's not because they were bad in a previous life, and that's why they suffer. I think it's really important that we don't, because it's easy to jump to conclusions, isn't it, that something bad happens because we've got bad karma, whatever that means. And it's really important, or that happens to somebody else. It's really important that we look at those levels and we look at what it could be because of this. It could be, purely because of something to do with the organic and inorganic levels. But I suppose we should, on the other hand, we shouldn't write off that sometimes, karma might influence in certain ways. We might find ourselves unconsciously creating patterns in our lives so that we repeat things. And those might be something that we are bringing karmically to what's going on. But it's very complicated. It's very complicated. I suppose the second thing is that we need to, if we're wanting to change, we need to work in all those three levels before we get to karma as well. It's really important that we have a healthy body. We need to make sure that we have enough exercise, enough sleep, that we have good food, good nutrition. I was once anemic, so there was like an inorganic law going on there, not enough iron getting around my body, and it had a big effect on me. Those kind of things can have a big effect on us. So we need to make sure that we're setting up conditions in the first three levels where we're looking after our body. We also need to understand ourselves. So we need to discover what kind of a person we are and work with that. So everybody's got certain physical and biological attributes. So some people are colourblind, for instance. Some people are on the Asperger's spectrum. There seems to be something in their brain that's maybe different from people who aren't on the spectrum. It's very difficult to know often what's cultural and what's genetic, what's biological, but we seem to come into this world perhaps with some aspects of our personality or some ways of seeing things there. Mothers have often told me that their new baby seems to come with a personality of some kind of its own, already from the beginning. Some of us are more extrovert, some of us are more introvert. What we need to do is know this about ourselves and work with it. We're not, we can influence many things about ourselves, but some things we can't influence. Those things are given, and we will work with that as we grow. On the karma level, something that will really help us is to have used the ethical precepts as a guide. So if what we're trying to do is respond creatively in each situation in a way that will help us to grow, the ethical precepts are really helpful guides for that. We can ask ourselves, if we're starting to feel a bit uneasy, we can think, I wonder which precept I might be about to break here. Something we might do is bring to mind somebody we really admire, and we might think, would they do what I'm about to do as well? That might be a guide for us as well. We can't always trust how we feel. Hopefully I made that clear when I talked about karma, because how we feel in a certain situation is the results of things we've done before. So how we feel at the time is not necessarily the best guide. We might want to have a guide of precepts of other people who we trust that we use to guide us in a particular situation. Another thing that's really important to do if we want to be working with conditionality, particularly the karma level, is reflect. Have time to reflect. There's a nice story about when the Buddha went back home and his son Rahula was really interested in becoming a monk and practicing the Buddhist life. And the Buddha gave him a little talk about karma, and he said to him, think about your actions of body, speech and mind. Think about them before you do whatever it is, during you do it, or while you're doing it, and after you've done it. Ask yourself, will this action lead to self-affliction, to the affliction of others, or to both? Is it an unskillful action with painful consequences and painful results, or is it a skillful action with happy consequences, with happy results? So we could be reflecting on our lives. Is what I'm planning to do now going to bring happiness to me and others, or is it actually going to bring suffering to me and others? And we can think about it before we do it, while we're doing it, and afterwards. One way that we can reflect is by writing. perhaps spending like 15 minutes writing every day. And this is one of those things where I'm a bit like, don't do what I do, but do what I say. Because I can see, whenever I have done that in my life, and I have spent 10 or 15 minutes every day just reflecting on my life, it's had quite a big effect on me. But somehow I find it difficult to make time to do it. I don't know why. But it's really worth trying that out. Satyajyoti, who's the founder of the Three Neama movement, somebody once asked him, so what's different about you and the rest of us? And he said, well, what I do is I reflect on everything I do and I learn from everything that I do. Which I thought was really interesting, actually. And he has a lot of things have come out of his reflection. Lots of people's lives have changed for the better because of the way that he thinks about things. One of the things we could reflect on is, do we really believe that karma works? Do we really believe that how we behave in the moment could change our future lives and the lives of other people? Have we seen it work for ourselves and for others? Sometimes in order to see that, we need to really look very kind of keenly and reflect deeply on our lives and our experience. If I really believed in the Karma Mirman, and that if I was to purify my mind, the Dharma Niyama would come through to me more, how would I behave? Would I behave like I do now? It's a really interesting question. Do I really believe that it would work? And what would I do differently if I really believed it worked? Another area, of course, where we can really make big changes is in meditation. So mindfulness, well, first of all, it allows us to learn who we really are. We get a sense of what our mind really does when we sit down to do the mindfulness of breathing. What is it really interested in all the time? It allows us to practice being in the gap, to see our mind go off somewhere, to gently bring it back to the breathing. It allows us to practice training our minds. And of course, metta bhavana, really helps us to develop positive mental states. It helps us to act more skillfully with others, to be kind to ourselves, to be kind to others. It particularly helps us to get a different sense of those people we find difficult as well, in a way to retrain our minds about how we are with people we find difficult. And of course, experiences in meditation, perhaps in just sitting, perhaps in any meditation, they might encourage us to trust more in the Dharma Niyama, to be able to open ourselves up to a different way of experiencing the world. So I think meditation is a really important tool. Another thing is to put ourselves in good conditions, because if every moment of our lives is affecting our future, the people that we spend time with will really affect us. So the more we can spend time with people who are ethical people, positive people, with the Sangha, with our friends, the more that we will grow from that. I was thinking we need to treat ourselves and other people actually like we're a precious flower. So I've got a new rose bush outside my door, and I love my rose bush. And I realise I'm really keen on watering it and looking after it. And there's something about if all of us saw ourselves as being as precious as that rose bush, which we are more precious than the rose bush, and we looked after ourselves, if we put ourselves in good conditions, we would flower in that same way. We can't force these things. We can't force ourselves to change and grow. What we can do is put ourselves in conditions where we will naturally respond to those conditions. Okay, so to sum up, not everything that happens to us is karma. Okay, really important that not everything that happens to us is karma. Everything happens as a result of conditions, but not all those conditions are karma. They are the other niyamas as well. However, the actions of our body, our speech and our mind that we choose to act out will create our future experience. And this experience will create the world we live in. So reality is patterned, it has certain regularities. When we act in accordance with the Karma Mirman, we create a different kind of mind. And from this kind of mind, we're able to experience and be changed by the Dharma Niyama. That's the process that creates Buddhas. So creating this kind of mind is the great task of the Dharma life. And isn't it wonderful that this is open to us, that we can put ourselves in line with these processes, that we can work in all those niyamas and allow the Dharma Niyama to arise in our minds.